ποια η μοίρα της των Ρωμαίων βασιλείας. Σύψης κατατρώει τη Ρώμη από μέσα, την ώρα που η Μεθόριος καίγεται. Φιλονικούν οι γραφειοκράτες και οι μνηστήρες εξουσία, ενώ ο κοινός λαός γίνεται άθεος. Σωτήρος έχει η Ρώμη χρία, εμού. Ζεφ, ευλόγησον.
Christianity seemed to have won, and the Roman world was ruled by Christian emperors in the godlike style of the dominant era. Against the tide of the age, against events and people, came Julian. He was devoted to the ideals of the old principate, and saw himself as a philosopher-emperor, a sophist, and a follower of Neoplatonic Hellenism. Posterity did not treat him too well, and we now know him as Julian the Apostate.
Της κερδής του πατρός μου τούτη η φιλία ήτο, καθώς πράγματι έζησε ο πατέρας μου στην πόλη σας.
Julian was Constantine the Great's nephew. He was born Flavius Claudius Julianus in 331 CE in Constantinople. His father was Constantine's half-brother, Julius Constantinus, and his mother, Flavia Balassinia, the daughter of the Egyptian Praetorian prefect, Julius Julianus. Julian's parents were both Christians, and he received the Arian Christian upbringing and early tutoring by the Bishop of Nicomedia, Eusebius. In 337, Constantine the Great died. 5 claimants rose to seize the throne, the late emperor's 3 sons and his 2 half-brothers, one of them Julian's father. Constantius, one of the emperor's 3 sons, cut the loose ends by murdering his half-uncle. The circumstances must have been traumatic for the 6-year-old Julian, as his father and elder brother were now dead, the property confiscated, and he was only spared due to his tender age along with his 12-year-old brother. The sons of Constantine continued their strife. In 340, Constantine was killed in an ambush, allowing Constans to assume control of the western part of the empire, while Constantius continued to rule the east. 10 years later, in 350, due to his cruelty and scandals, Constans lost the support of his army and was murdered by Magnentius, a Roman general of Frankish origins, who then turned on Constantius, the sole Constantinian emperor. The latter soon realized that one man alone could not control such a vast empire. In these tumultuous times, Julian was in Nicomedia and Cappadocia, where he was tutored by the greatest names of science and philosophy, such as Mardonius, Nicocles, the great orator Agabolus, and Labinius, a great teacher of rhetoric and a supporter of the pagan Hellenic religion and the Greco-Roman mysteries. Inspired by the glory of the old times and by his teachers, Julian renounced his Christian teachings and sought solace in paganism and Hellenistic philosophy. Henceforth, he was known as Julian the Apostate to historians and Christians.
Δεν θα είχα ξεφύγει από τα χέρια του χωρίς την καλοσύνη της ωραίας και καλής αυτοκράτηρας ευσέβειας.
Magnentius' threat could not be left unchecked, so Constantius turned his full attention to him. To ensure control in the east, he appointed Julian's brother, Gallus, to the rank of Caesar and tasked him to secure the unstable province of Judea. Gallus soon lost the support of the local population, as he was considered to have abused his power. The troubling news reached Constantius, who after defeating Magnentius, made peace with the Alemanni tribes, and in 354 summoned Gallus and intended to have him executed. Gallus, realizing the threat, remained in the east, but was eventually lured in with the promise of the rank of Augustus. He was captured on his way to Mediolanum in Pola, and he was executed. Constantius then called upon Julian, not because he wanted to promote him, but to execute him as well. He feared that Julian would fare no better than his brother and would be an incompetent relative that could be a threat to his power. Julian could not be given a chance to put any promises in disarray. Constantius hesitated about the execution, and eventually his wife, Empress Eusebia, convinced him to spare Julian's life. In early November 355, Constantius appointed Julian as Caesar, wed him to his sister Helena, and placed him into Gaul, a province that suffered from unrest and constant Frankish and Alemanni raids. If Julian succeeded, then the west would be safe. But if he failed, which was expected, well, then Constantius would have the excuse he lacked to rid himself of a threatening relative. Julian, ready for the task, left Mediolanum with his small retinue and headed for Gaul.
Προς τα πού φεύγουμε, γενναίοι μου? Πάμε πίσω στους συντρόφους μας, τουλάχιστον στην επερχόμενη τους δόξα να είμαστε κοινωνοί.
Gaul was falling apart with public unrest and enemy raids constantly threatening it. Julian had no military experience, and yet surprised everyone with his diligence and talent. His main objective was to drive out the Frankish invaders from the province. In the summer of 356, he took back Reme and its surrounding territories. They pushed further to the Rhine and recaptured Colonia Agrippina. Julian didn't leave Gaul in winter, nor did he move to some comfortable mansion. He stayed with his men in his winter camp as the situation was threatening. To put pressure on the young Caesar, Frankish forces besieged the camp until Roman reinforcements came. The Franks refused to give up their acquisitions so readily, and so Julian devised a plan with Constantius to retake the Rhinelands and create a safe buffer zone for Roman Gaul. Julian's army was very capable, but lacked the numbers to deal with the Franks, so Constantius ordered one of his generals, Barbatio, mustered available forces in Italy and pushed north from Mediolanum, while Julian would approach from the west. However, Julian was delayed due to an Alemanni raid, and Barbatio, finding himself without any support, retreated. Julian, with his limited forces, was now alone in the area, and the Germanic tribes knew that this was their opportunity to strike and conquer the whole of Roman Gaul. King Conodomaris of the Alemanni wanted the support of the tribes and marched against Julian with a large and powerful army. Their numerical advantage and previous successes against the Romans made the Germans confident enough to seek victory in a pitched battle. The two armies met near Argentoratum in the spring of 357 AD. Julian and his 13,000 men had to face the 35,000 warriors of the Alemanni. As the two armies approached each other, the generals drew up their forces. Julian deployed his army in typical Roman fashion. His first line of infantry was placed in a wide and deep line, supported by archers, followed by a second line of infantry reserves. He positioned himself with his bodyguards in between the two lines of infantry. The terrain on the Roman left was rough, and that prevented effective use of cavalry, so Julian deployed his mixture of light and heavy horse on his right. Yet, he suspected an enemy ambush in the forest on his left, so he sent a small detachment under his trusted officer Severus to seek and destroy enemy forces in that area. Conodomaris had indeed planned an ambush on his right wing, with around 2,000 soldiers that he would send to approach the Romans undetected. The vast Roman cavalry advantage could result in losing his left wing, and his army being flanked and pincered. To counter that threat, the king placed contingents of light troops hidden among his cavalry while he dropped the rest of his army in two lines, similar to the Romans. When the tribal leaders demanded Conodomaris and his company of chiefs to lead them from the front on foot, Conodomaris immediately agreed, flattered, and seeking further glory on the battlefield. This decision was to prove fatal. The king would be in no position to see what was happening on the flanks of the Alemanni, and by bringing all his officers in the center, he had broken the flow of command. His army was without leadership. Still, the battle started favorably for the Alemanni. The Romans stopped advancing and Julian sent his horsemen to charge. The Germanic cavalry, supported by infantry, broke the Romans and drove them back. The Roman cataphracts retreated through their own lines, and the Germans, sensing victory, surged forward. The Romans remained in position and pushed back the German advance, while the Roman cavalry was regrouped by Julian. Seeing this great success, Juan de Lara ordered an all-out charge in hopes of quickly breaking the Roman infantry, who quickly formed a shield wall and was ready to hold the line. This tight and disciplined formation proved to be very effective. The Alemanni soldiers could not break through the Romans and started to tire. Juan Marius therefore gathered his best men into a wedge formation and ordered them to break through the Roman lines. This move succeeded in breaking through the center, but the Roman flank stayed in formation and did not collapse. When the Germans crashed into the Roman reserve line, they were stopped and pushed back. Meanwhile, Ceres had cleared an ambush force in the woods and attacked the German right in the rear, relieving the Romans on the left. The Roman reserves pushed back the Germans and the gap was closed, while both flanks started to envelop the tired and demoralized Alemanni, who lost several chieftains and leaders in the failed breakthrough. Eventually, the Alemanni army fled the field, and the Romans ran them down mercilessly, even capturing Juan Marius. Julian had miraculously won the battle, scoring a crushing victory over the Alemanni. His losses were minimal, while the Germans lost over 8,000 men. Julian had proven himself to be a capable commander and earned the love of his men, who proclaimed him Augustus, a title Julian refused. When the news reached Constantius, he was alarmed, so he assigned Florentius, the Praetorian prefect of Gaul, to watch over and report on his cousin. The two men frequently fought over taxation and administration matters. Florentius imposed a tax raise that Julian vetoed, arguing that the citizens of Gaul cannot pay the increased taxes, thus gaining popularity among the masses. Nevertheless, they could work together when it was needed, as Florentius accompanied Julian on smaller campaigns in the area. In 360, Shapur II invaded the province of Mesopotamia and secured several land gains for Constantius. The emperor decided to call on a significant number of Julian's forces in order to bolster his army in the east and also to secure his western hinterland without the fear of Julian attacking him in the back. The soldiers, however, rebelled, as they did not want to leave Julian and Gaul behind, and in a mighty turn of events, they proclaimed Julian Augustus. Julian accepted the title, but did not use it until the end of the year, as he first secured his position in the area. During the rebellion, Helena, Julian's wife and Constantius' sister, died. An important tie was severed between the two men. Still, Julian wanted to settle the matter without bloodshed, but the negotiations between him and Constantius fell short, and by 361, another bloody civil war was on the horizon. Constantius made peace with Shapur and quickly marched against the new Augustus, while Julian pushed forward into Illyria. There was no decisive clash between them, as Constantius fell sick during his march and died. In his last will, he recognized Julian as his rightful successor. Julian, now undisputed emperor, continued his march and entered Constantinople at the end of 361.
Αυτός που εξορίστηκε από τόσα αυτοκρατορικά διατάγματα και τόσους αυτοκράτορες έπρεπε να περιμένει τουλάχιστον ένα αυτοκρατορικό διάταγμα για να γυρίσει.
When Julian entered Constantinople, the ascetic emperor found the capital a cesspit of flatterers, eunuchs, and scheming courtiers. Intolerant of luxury, bureaucracy, and ceremony, Julian sought to reorganize the old court. Libanius recounts that Julian swept away the thousands of cooks, barbers, and butlers, some dressed as well as the high-ranking officers of the army. The court of Constantius was purged with a Chalcedon tribunal, made up of both military and civilian leaders. This not only removed Constantius' old ministers, but also won the goodwill of the eastern armies, who hated the scheming courtiers and their intrigues. On account of their widespread abuses, and also to make himself more reachable, imperial spies and highly influential secretaries were removed as well. Julian also hoped to revitalize the Senate, not only to secure a base of power, but also for the cities to look after their own affairs, with leadership provided by local councillors. Being a Hellenophile, Julian encouraged a revival of the Greek cities by lowering the requirements for eligibility for the city councils and by increasing the councillor numbers. He also proclaimed that no one should henceforth claim exemption from service as a councillor on the grounds of being a Christian. This was done in order to restore the affluent and intelligent citizens to the local councils, as well as divert ecclesiastical profits to the cause of Hellenic revival. Incorruptible and indifferent to wealth and luxury, Julian tried to restore the empire's economy. He issued that restored territories were to be leased at a fair rate, made a Roman coronarum, the act of indulging emperors in golden reefs, as optional, to alleviate redundant spending. And he also reformed the tax system. Tax collectors were open to prosecution every 5 years. Those guilty of fraud were subject to torture. New taxes were also to be delivered to the emperor to review before they were implemented. Julian had a clear vision on how to restore the empire to its former glory, a trait that was rare among the late emperors of Rome. His educated past shone not only in his administration capabilities, but in his writing skill as well.
Όσο η γνώμη των πολλών σε θέλει δούλο, δεν έχει φτάσει ακόμα στην ελευθερία, ούτε έχει γευτεί τον νέκταρ της.
Despite his short reign, Julian wrote volumes of work, from letters to fellow philosophers to satirical pieces. Sampling his writings and beliefs, we will focus on two of his works, the Caesars and the famous, or infamous, Against the Galileans. The Caesars give us a remarkable insight into Julian's character and his opinions on those who came before him. The book is a satire attacking emperors of whom Julian has a low opinion of, and praising those who he admires. Each emperor is judged by Zeus. If they are unworthy, they are led away, or in the case of Caligula, hurled back into Tartarus. Not surprisingly, Constantine is judged unworthy by Zeus, and is led away by the personifications of pleasure and incontinence. Julian further attacks Constantine and the Christians when the Christian emperor met Jesus, who had cried out to all, "He that is a seducer, he that is a murderer, he that is sacrilegious and infamous, let him approach without fear. For with this water will I wash him, and will straightway make him clean. And though he should be guilty of those same sins a second time, let him but smite his breast and beat his head, and I will make him clean again." Here, Julian laughs at the notion of forgiveness preached by the Christians, showing his intolerance against Christianity as well as his notion of justice. Above all else, Julian revered two men, Alexander the Great and Marcus Aurelius. In Caesars, he praises them, but not without pointing out their flaws. Alexander is revered for his courage and piety, but criticized for being too cruel. Marcus Aurelius, the winner of the competition, is praised for his piety, but also his humbleness and stoic disposition. Aurelius, however, is criticized for entrusting the empire to his son, a fact that Julian took to heart and was one of the many reasons why he later rejected the notion of remarriage. Julian sought to emulate the virtues of both men, valor from Alexander and modesty from Marcus Aurelius. Against the Galileans is a scathing attack on the Christians that Julian wrote in Antioch. Only fragments of the three books have survived in sorrow of Alexander's refutation of Julian. Therefore, we do not know the entirety of his arguments besides those Cyril chose to refute, and unfortunately, some of his arguments seem to be disconnected. That said, we can still trace the underlying motivation and contention. Julian uses his Christian upbringing to support his arguments along with other authors that predated him, such as the Platonist Celsus. He argues that the Bible is full of contradictions and discrepancies and accuses the Christians of hypocrisy for preaching universal love and yet condemning heretics. He points out that the Christians castigate people who are jealous and whilst at the same time see God's jealousy as a divine quality. Julian accuses Christians of abandoning Judaism and contributing nothing of note to the world, whilst others such as the Babylonians and Hellenes contributed astronomy, the Egyptians geometry, and the Phoenicians arithmetic. He also compares Genesis with Plato's Timaeus, which he argues is superior. Julian compares Heracles and Asclepius with Jesus, arguing that the former do help mankind whilst the latter only helped a few villages of Judea. It is without a doubt that Julian had hoped his books would help stop the continuing spread of Christianity, but he was wrong. Christianity was far too entrenched in the upper classes and the cities of the empire. Moreover, his reign was too short to have any impact on the empire, and once he died, his books were burnt and his name damned. In Against the Galileans, we see Julian's intolerance of Christianity most directly, as well as his reasons as to why he became an apostate. It seems the primary motivation behind his work was the fear that Christianity may one day annihilate the Hellenic cult and culture, something the Hellenophile Julian could not allow to happen.
Ο ζήλος να κάνει κανείς όσα είναι μέσα στις δυνάμεις του είναι στα αλήθεια απόδειξη πίστεως.
It is unknown when Julian converted, but when he received news that Constantius was dead, he cast off his mask and revealed to the world the fanatic Pagan. At first, Julian issued declarations of tolerance to the Christians, hoping to secure his power before his real work began. It became soon apparent that the emperor had no intention to protect Christians when he let the murder of the Arian bishop George of Cappadocia to go unpunished. Rather than strike with brute force as previous emperors had with their purges, Julian's strategy was to subtly dismantle the Christians. He began his purification of Christianity with his edict that barred Christians from teaching grammar, rhetoric, and philosophy. His policy was simple. If the Christians could be deprived of classical learning, literature, and methods, then within a generation, the educated elite of the empire would once again be pagan. Many great pagan temples were restored, and a humanitarian program was started in place of the Christians' charity to the poor and powerless. He also sought to rebuild the temple at Jerusalem, hoping that Judaism would act as a pressure to the Christians in the east. Julian was not only intolerant to the Christians, he also detested other forms of pagan cults. He advocated for austere and fanatical religion, and was furious with the cynics who criticized his regime and claimed higher wisdom. He insisted on pagan unity, but claimed there was only one right philosophy, which, plain to all, was his. Julian was an unabashed pagan, praying 100 bulls and countless flocks of animals of all kinds as sacrifices to the altar of the gods. He was obsessed with soothsaying, rituals, and sacrifices. Anyone who claimed to have the gift of soothsaying was allowed to inspect the remains of the sacrifices to give him an omen. It is obvious that Julian, like Alexander, clearly believed in his own destiny.
Έχω προμηθευτεί άριστα άλογα και ημιώνους και συγκέντρωσα τις δυνάμεις μου.
Julian was 31 when he decided to invade the Sassanid Empire. The reasons are unclear. Some historians say he wanted the title Paphicus. Others argued he wanted to follow in the footsteps of his hero, Alexander the Great. Nevertheless, Julian wanted to secure the eastern border of the empire and retake the provinces that were lost to the Persians. Shapur II, the Sassanid Shah, wanted no conflict between them and sent envoys to Julian, but the emperor rejected them. Before embarking on his campaign, Julian stationed his army in Antioch, where he was not received warmly by the Christian population. His popularity diminished further when he tried to solve a grain pricing problem by fixing its price, therefore not allowing the greedy merchants to exploit the population. This solution didn't fix the problem completely, and tensions remained. On March 363, Julian began his campaign against the Sassanids. He amassed a formidable force around 65,000 soldiers and devised a plan of a two-frontal assault against the Persian capital, Ctesiphon. When the army reached the infamous Carrhae, Julian gave command of half his army to Procopius, his cousin, and tasked him to march to Armenia. His mission was to join the forces of Arsaces, the Armenian king, ensure his support, and then move down the Tigris and meet Julian's forces near Ctesiphon. Julian moved down the Euphrates River, and he hoped that his maneuvers would confuse the Sassanid forces. The plan worked, and Julian was able to push deep into enemy territory with relatively small resistance. In a few months, he reached Ctesiphon and defeated the Persian garrison under the city walls. Even though he won the Battle of Ctesiphon, Julian found himself trapped. He had very few siege equipment and supplies, and Procopius' forces were delayed in Armenia. The siege left him exposed to the main Sassanid army, and his numerically inferior army couldn't deal with them both. In the war council, it was decided that the best way of action would be to retreat back to Roman territory. The retreat along the eastern side of the Tigris River was to prove perilous. The Sassanids scorched the earth in front of the retreating Romans, preventing them from resupplying from the land, while they constantly harassed their forces. On June 363, a skirmish between the Roman rearguard and the Sassanids began, which eventually resulted in a full-scale battle as both sides deployed their main forces on the battlefield. On this scorching day, in the heat of the Persian waste, the Roman army faced its greatest peril yet. In the heat of battle, Julian was struck by a spear. Only the night ended the brutal combat, and both sides suffered heavy casualties. Eventually, Julian succumbed to his wounds in his tent. No successor was named, so the generals proclaimed the Praetorian prefect Seleucus as emperor, but he refused. The choice fell on Jovian, the captain of the imperial bodyguards, and the newly named emperor quickly signed a humiliating peace treaty with Shapur and returned to the empire. Julian was laid to rest according to his wishes in Tarsus. Julian is ultimately a tragic hero. He was a man worthy to be counted among the heroic spirits, and marked alike by the distinction of his achievements and his natural dignity. The emperor made few friends, and unlike Constantius, was not beloved by the people who were puzzled by the ascetic Pagan. The Romans had grown decadent, those who were rich profited from the corrupt bureaucracy, and the rest were simply trying to survive, caring naught for who ruled. The army demanded victories and wealth at the expense of the empire, and was all too eager to back those who promised glory and gold. Christianity appealed to many and was spreading, while the old ways were abandoned and forgotten. Julian had tried to reshape the crumbling Roman Empire in his vision, and that vision vanished when he fell. No purges came, no trials. Those loyal to Julian remained in positions of power, simply continuing under the next emperors. He demanded too much, he compromised too unwisely and too little. His greatest fear became reality, but rather than destroy the whole empire, Christianity acted as a unifier in the East, allowing the Eastern Romans to continue 1,000 years after Rome itself had fallen. Julian, more than any of the late emperors, had a vision for Rome. He sought to heal a sick empire, where he was considered an outsider, an intellectual who had neither experience nor understanding of the everyday world. He had plans and ideas to fix the floundering economy and venal imperial court. He successfully led and won victories for an army that was pressed on all fronts. Admired by many for his courage, his intellect, his pursuit of his dreams, his nobility and his vigor, Julian may have failed, but he was not forgotten. If Julian's soul survives in some refulgent Neoplatonist heaven, he must surely be pleased with the immortality of his memory here on earth.